In the vast sun-scorched deserts of modern-day Iraq, one of the world's first great civilizations was born. Here, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumer bloomed. They gave us cities, laws, and the invention of writing, but among the tens of thousands of clay tablets they left behind, one set of documents stands apart, records so profound they challenge the very first chapter of the human story. They aren't just poems or myths, but official records, and they describe a time when kingship was handed down from heaven, and the first rulers were something else. In the early 1900s, a German-American archaeologist named Hermann Hilprecht was working at the ancient site of Nippur when he unearthed something extraordinary. It was a small, four-sided clay prism covered in the tight, wedge-shaped script of cuneiform. Today, it's known as the Weld-Blundell-Prisma, the most complete copy of what we call the Sumerian king list. As scholars translated its ancient script, they uncovered a timeline that defied all logic. The list begins with a simple, chilling statement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. It then names its first kings, who ruled before a great flood swept the world, and gives their reigns in millennia. One king ruled for 28,800 years, another for 36,000. Mainstream history dismisses these figures as fantasy. But here's the problem. The very same document, without a break, goes on to list later kings whose reigns were plausible and whose existence is backed by other evidence. This authenticated artifact makes us ask a startling question. What if we're not reading a fairy tale, but a history book whose rules we've forgotten? Before we get lost in the impossible numbers, it helps to understand what this thing actually is. The Sumerian king list isn't just one tablet, but a collection of at least 18 different versions discovered across Mesopotamia, most dating to around 4,000 years ago. While they have their differences, they all seem to come from a single, shared, ideal history of their world. The most famous version, the Weld-Blundell-Prisma, was designed to be rotated on a spindle, a kind of four-sided readable column. It was, in effect, one of humanity's earliest history books, a systematic chronicle of power. The list was a powerful political document meant to legitimize the current king by showing he was the rightful heir to a continuous line of power stretching back to the beginning of time, a power granted directly from the gods. The Sumerians were meticulous record keepers. They developed writing not for poetry, but for accounting, to track grain, livestock, and taxes. They created a complex base 60 math system, which we still use today to measure time and degrees in a circle. They charted the stars with startling accuracy. This wasn't a culture given to careless exaggeration. Their records were their truth. So, when these same scribes created a document chronicling their history with bureaucratic precision, we have to consider they believed it was entirely factual. To them, the king list wasn't a collection of bedtime stories. It was a state-sanctioned historical record. And that record begins in an age so distant, it precedes all known human civilization. The king list is split into two distinct parts, before the flood and after. The first section is what makes this document so baffling. It begins in the city of Eridu, which the Sumerians considered the first city on Earth. Here, the first king, Alulim, took the throne. According to the scribes who etched his name into clay, he ruled for 28,800 years. His successor reigned for 36,000 years. The list names 8 kings across 5 cities who ruled for a combined total of 241,200 years. These aren't just random fantastical numbers, they're specific and calculated. They are based on the Sumerian numerical unit known as a Isai, which represents 3,600 years. Alulim's reign was precisely 8 sars. To the Sumerians, these numbers were precise measurements of time, just on a scale we can't comprehend. This era is known as the antediluvian period, the time before the Great Flood. The world it describes is one where kingship was a divine gift, and the rulers themselves seemed more than mortal. While the list doesn't call them gods, their lifespans certainly aren't those of men. The cities they supposedly governed, Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, have been identified by archaeologists, their foundations lying deep beneath the Iraqi sands. This grounds the narrative in a physical reality. These were real places. This part of the list presents a portrait of a mythological epic, an age of incredible stability ruled by a handful of sovereigns for nearly 250,000 years. It's a history that ended abruptly and violently. After detailing the 241,200-year reign of the first 8 kings, the Sumerian king list reaches its dramatic turning point. The text states simply and ominously, "Then the flood swept over." This cataclysmic event serves as a hard reset for civilization. The 5 cities of the antediluvian kings were wiped away, and their impossibly long-reigning monarchs vanished. But the story doesn't end. The list continues. After the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. This idea of a world-destroying flood isn't unique to the Sumerians. The story echoes in cultures all over the globe. The Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh tells a detailed story of a great flood sent by angry gods. And most famously, the biblical book of Genesis tells the story of Noah and his ark. But the connection between the king list and Genesis is startlingly specific. Both texts describe a pattern of extreme longevity before the flood and a sharp decrease in lifespans afterward. Just as the antediluvian kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, early figures in Genesis, like Methuselah, lived for many hundreds of years. After the flood, in both narratives, lifespans shrink dramatically. This shared pattern suggests something more than coincidence. It may point toward a common, ancient memory of a real catastrophe that left a deep mark on early humanity. The Sumerians weren't just telling a story, they were recording what they saw as a historical dividing line. Before the flood was one epic. After the flood was another, the beginning of the world as they knew it. It's in the post-flood section that the king list d'Assas becomes truly mind-bending. After the flood, kingship is re-established in Kish. The new kings still have very long reigns. The first one, Jushur, is said to have ruled for 1,200 years. But as the list progresses, the reigns get shorter and shorter, moving from thousands of years to hundreds, and eventually to completely plausible figures. And it's here that we find a name that seems to bridge the gap between myth and history: Gilgamesh. According to the king list, Gilgamesh was the 5th king of Uruk, ruling for 126 years. For a long time, Gilgamesh was thought to be a purely mythological hero. But while direct archaeological proof is missing, many scholars now believe he was a real historical king of Uruk around 2700 BCE, based on other inscriptions from the period that mention him. This is the central puzzle of the Sumerian king list. It's a single continuous document that lists the seemingly mythical 28,800-year reign of Alulim in the same tone and format as the historical reign of Gilgamesh. To the scribes, it was all one unbroken history. If we accept that Gilgamesh was likely a real person, how can we so easily dismiss the kings who came before him on the very same list? The document doesn't allow for a neat separation of legend and reality. It suggests that the fantastic stories from the dawn of time and the documented history of later dynasties are part of the same singular story of humanity. The list itself is the bridge, daring us to cross it. So, what do we make of all this? How do we explain a historical document that records the seemingly impossible? The mainstream academic view is that the antediluvian reigns are symbolic, not literal. The huge numbers, scholars argue, were a form of political propaganda to express immense power, divine favor, and ancient lineage. The numbers themselves, based on their base 60 math system, may have held a sacred meaning that is now lost to us. In this interpretation, the list is a tool of statecraft designed to legitimize a king's rule by wrapping it in the grandeur of a mythical past. But that explanation doesn't satisfy everyone. It doesn't fully account for the sharp drop in lifespans after the flood, a pattern seen in other ancient traditions. And why would a culture so obsessed with accurate records suddenly indulge in such wild fantasy at the beginning of their most important historical document? This leads to more speculative theories. Some wonder if the years were different, perhaps shorter time periods. Others point to the so-called Sumerian problem, the fact that Sumerian civilization appears in Mesopotamia with incredible sophistication. However, this is misleading, as archaeological evidence shows a gradual development from earlier local cultures like the Ubaid and Uruk periods. One of the most radical ideas is that the list means exactly what it says, that the antediluvian kings were rulers from a long-lost civilization destroyed by the flood. The Sumerian king list sits at the crossroads of myth and history, a 4,000-year-old puzzle etched in clay. It is both a meticulously kept record and a chronicle of the impossible. Was it a piece of sophisticated political symbolism, a misunderstood calculation, or a literal memory of a lost age? The truth is, we don't know. But the existence of this artifact, blending verifiable people with unbelievable legends, challenges what we think we know about our past. It suggests the story of civilization may be far older and stranger than we've imagined. It's a quiet whisper from the dawn of time, reminding us that some histories aren't buried, but are just waiting to be remembered. What do you believe? Do these ancient records point to a forgotten chapter of our history? Or are they the powerful poetry of a civilization trying to make sense of its own origins? Let us know your theory in the comments below.